then there were two S6S 420Gs. So there's the one that needs to have the rear cover repaired or replaced. Here's the rear cover that will hopefully and probably be going on there. It's got a little bit of salt corrosion from its past. Let's see if we can't clean that up a little bit. I'm not worried about this thing looking new, but we can probably improve upon that. Transmission came out in about 2 hours today with some help from the crew. Exhaust was simple. The 540 exhaust is just easier since the primary cats are built into the header, so you don't have to worry about upstream O2 sensors. Here it is. This car spent time in the desert, so it is pretty sandy, dirty. The good news is there's no rust anywhere on this 540, which I'm very pleased about. But really no surprises. I had kind of forgotten the standard E39 has a clutch delay valve. So we pulled that out today and rebled the clutch slave cylinder. So that'll be ready to go in without a CDV, which should increase clutch control by somebody who's comfortable with the manual. Pulled the shifter carrier today. Normal suspects, 545 short shifter, new bushings and hardware there. The pilot bearing actually popped out. It stayed on the input shaft of the transmission. So we were able to get that lined up and pressed back in without removing the clutch kit, which I have no plans of doing. The rear main seal's dry, and the clutch and flywheel, as I said yesterday, were replaced something like 6,000 miles ago, so I shouldn't have to worry about that too much right now. One of the smaller M10 thread upper bell housing bolts right there. Socket didn't make it all the way on there, so it chewed up the head, but it did come out, so I've got a new one of those on order. The flex disc had been replaced before, but way over torqued, so I threw the bolts and nuts away from that. Got if the new bolts weren't $30 a piece, I'd replace them, but borrowed some used ones off an M5, and then I did order new nuts. One of the transmission brace bolts, there's three 13 millimeter M8 bolts back here, or M10 bolts. One of those we noted during the MPI had been broken off before. The head was gone and the threads were flush right there. So we drilled that out, actually used an easy out, and it unthreaded for us, so the threads were undamaged. The one next to it, this one here in the rear, was way over torqued and the threads don't look pretty. So I've chased all of those threads, cleaned up all the old bell housing bolts, chased those threads, and then tomorrow we'll do the threads in the block and the lower pan and just make sure everything's going to be nice. Drive shaft came out without incident. I am going to replace the 6 nuts back here at the diff input. Diff is not going to come out. It's dry. The bushings are not cracked, so I just don't want to dig in there too hard. I did clean up an old CV joint had spun grease all over the heat shield here, so I cleaned that up with some magical 91 octane degreasing fluid approved by Al Gore. And the drive shaft itself actually has a build date of 2005. So it must have been replaced under warranty, if I'm reading this right. That looks like the 31st of May, 2005. So it was kind of dusty like everything else. I cleaned it up. I guess technically that's rust. I'll put a little paint on that. I'm not worried about that at all. Fresh center support bearing. The old one was ticking, so we've got a new one there. You can still see my alignment marks. Reused the shim, no problems there. Cleaned it up a little bit. U-joint's nice and tight. Fresh CV joint at the end with grease, needs to be cleaned up and have a gasket put on there. Obviously a new circlip at the end, and the new hose clamp to hold the boot on there in the front. So that means the drive shaft's ready to go back in. The shifter's done. It's pretty much all just transmission focused now. And it looks like Monday's going to be the day I go rent some car, clean both of these up a little bit so they don't get anything dirty, put some plastic in the back of whatever rental I get, and drive them up there and have the cases swapped out. With the case swap out, I'm going to replace the output flange seal on the new transmission I'll be using. Obviously, I'm going to replace that seal in there. We'll clean up the selector shaft, and I have a new rod joint for it. I had talked about replacing the arrestor balls. That's not going to happen. It's a $200 kit now, and this transmission, aside from grinding in third gear, the detent pins and everything feel fantastic, so the arrestor balls will stay. The detents are actually up here in this section, so we'll keep the ones from the 65,000 mile car. On the Le Mans Blue 2001, diff got resealed today and completely cleaned up. It's back in the car. The subframe's back up at its proper height and torqued down. Diff's torqued. Waiting on our new drive shaft. We did get the rear main seal, or set of covers as they like to call it today, but it was late day, so that'll be the first thing that goes on tomorrow. Replace the rear main, then put the flywheel on, then put the new clutch kit on, and then it's a waiting game for the drive shaft, which is due by the end of next week. In the meantime, we've got seat twists to fix on this car. Really no suspension work. It's all been this driveline stuff, like I said yesterday. Then the clean 2008, that's actually dirty right now, dug into the EDC stuff today. So I printed out, let me pull this up. So I printed out the pinout for A80A EDC electronic damper control. And we've got a couple different power sources and a couple different ground sources. So 2 connectors, a 10 pin and a 18 pin. The 10 pin, they're really, really big pins. Like this is a E39 GM3, but that size. And then the 18 pin are those little connectors. So in the 18 pin connector, we had a wake up signal at terminal 30. We get a nice 13.4 volts there. We have a supply for terminal 30 here. Did I say 30? I meant 15 over there. Supply for terminal 30 fuse to fuse 19, which is good, 5 amp, and we get 13 volts there, so no problem. There's one ground in the whole system. That's pin 6 on the 10 pin, and a nice big fatty, and there's no problem there. That has clean continuity to ground, so I don't think there's a ground issue. Where we're not getting voltage is up here, supply terminal 87, which is a power saving relay. I can tell you now it is K93. That's the relay behind the glove box. I swapped it out with another E60 M5 here. No, Nate, not yours. That made no difference in operation. I'm not measuring any voltage at this pin number 1, with the car off, with the car running, with the key in position 2. It's nothing. On the Sepang car that we have in the 08 M5, I measured that, and as soon as you put the key on, it jumps up to 13 volts. So some sort of an issue here. Swapping the relay didn't fix it. Looks like there's some connection between that K93 relay and fuse F1A at A8680, which is engine electronics fuse block in the DME box. So that's what we're going to check tomorrow. It's a 10 amp fuse. I don't think we're going to find that blown because there'd be a bunch of other problems if we lost that 10 amp fuse. So we're going to have to chase wires, check continuity everywhere, and just kind of go through the circuit one wire at a time and figure out what's not working. Initially, I thought maybe it was a bad module, a bad EDC module, but since we're missing that voltage, it's some sort of an electrical issue somewhere else in the car. And this is a clean, low mileage car. As far as I can tell, completely unmodified. I don't know if there's been somebody poking around in the DME box before, but I think that's what we're going to get to tomorrow. When we fix the EDC problem, I will then be able to test drive the vehicle further and see if we get those DSC and ABS codes back. If not, we've removed the module, inspected everything, the wiring's clean, we have the proper voltages there, we bled the braking system out, brakes feel good, so we'll just have to see.